Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Draft, where I talk with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And joining me today is Andra Watkins. She is a New York Times bestselling author who writes for Such a Time as This on Substack. She also does a weekly show right here in Lincoln Square with Sam Osterhout, and that show is called Unholy Ground. And if you've checked it out, you know that that is your place to go for a deep dive into Christian nationalism every week. Andra, thank you for taking some time to talk with me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Susan. It's always great to be with you.
Thank you. Well, the topics that I wanted to get into with you are certainly very heavy, and just wanted to let our audience know that we will be talking about some really sensitive matters, involving violence against women and violence against children. But I do think these are really important topics for us to talk about, especially with where we're at in this country. Recently, Oklahoma just became the 17th state to ban child marriage, but it was a really close vote. It only passed by one vote in the House, and all of the no votes came from Republicans. And I wasn't really surprised seeing that, because a couple of years ago, I covered a similar fight in Michigan, which is a blue state, but there were a half dozen Republicans that opposed this initiative that seems like such common sense. Why would you want children to get married? And I thought that their responses were really telling. They tried to turn around that, like, hey, you support women playing in men's sports, and yet you're not going to let parents be able to make decisions for their children. They went like totally culture war with it. I know this doesn't surprise you, because you have literally written the book on white Christian nationalism, but can you talk with us about this dynamic and about this really radical strain that is running through the Republican Party?
Yes, so many Republicans are white Christian nationalists today, especially in a state like Oklahoma. And one of the things, if you've been indoctrinated in white Christian nationalism, or you've seen any of the films, the shows like the show on the Duggars about these different sects of white Christian nationalism, is they don't want children, especially young girls, to know how their bodies work. Mm-hmm. They don't want you to be taught sex education. I knew nothing about my reproductive system when I was a child and a teenager from growing up in that world. Part of the reason for that is it makes it easier for these older men to groom young women. When you don't understand what you're seeing, you don't understand how your body works, you don't understand what they're doing to you. And these men want young women and girls to marry, because taking their virginity is very important to these men. They don't want women to have outside experience that they can compare their performances to. So it makes it easier for these men to control women if they can lower the age of marriage for women and let a 20, 30, 40-something-year-old man marry a 14-year-old girl. She'll be a lot more controllable than even a 20-year-old woman or a 25-year-old woman would be. And so that's part of what drives how these men think about child marriage. It's robbing them of the opportunity to marry a very young girl and control her for life.
And we've seen so many scandals, with the Duggar family, with a lot of these, very conservative Christian icons. And a lot of them are the sexual abuse of minor girls. Can you talk with us about that? Because, this does not seem like a coincidence by any stretch of the imagination.
It cannot be healthy to be in an environment all the time where you're taught that sex is dirty, sex is filthy, In many contexts in Christian nationalism, they teach that the only acceptable sex act is intercourse for purposes of procreating, and any other sex act outside of that is filthy, dirty, sinful, and wrong. In the Catholic Church, we have people who can't marry. So you have all of these stigmas and behaviors that are taught in these congregations that demonize sex, that demonize the sex act, that teach you can never enjoy it. You should not be partaking of it except to make babies. And otherwise, it's a filthy, dirty, horrible thing. So when you teach people that something that is natural and normal, that we all, I mean, and there are people who don't have an urge to do it, but most people do have a natural urge to have sex and enjoy it. So when you teach people that they can't do that it's wrong, that it's filthy, that it's something to be ashamed of, it becomes very easy to make a shift in your mind to these deviant behaviors because it's all filthy. It's all horrible. So there's really no scale of what is actually acceptable and what's unacceptable. So it makes it much easier for these men, and almost all of them are men, to prey on young girls and boys and to groom them and sexually assault and abuse them because they've kept these children in the dark. They don't know what's happening to them in many cases. They don't know what is being done. They don't know how their bodies work. And then they're told after the fact, if you tell anyone, I'll ruin your life. I'll humiliate you. I'll throw you out of the Christian school. I'll make sure that your parents punish you. You know, so you have that kind of messaging going on in a lot of these communities.
Yeah. And we know that there remain double standards about sex for men and women, for boys and girls, but they're especially pronounced in this strain of white Christian nationalism. Can you talk with us a little bit about the different messages that boys and girls are raised with when it comes to sex and what kind of information that they might get?
Yes. So everything that drives this topic for white Christian nationalists comes from the story of Adam and Eve. And if you've seen my show Unholy Ground with Sam, we talk about the Genesis story of Adam and Eve a lot. Because if you didn't grow up in white Christian nationalism, you might not realize just how seminal that story is for them. So Adam and Eve were created by God, put in the Garden of Eden, and they have adopted the St. Augustine doctrine of original sin. St. Augustine was a monk. St. Augustine, Florida is named after him. He existed around 300 AD. So for those of you who don't know, I didn't grow up in Catholicism, didn't know what saints were until I married my husband. So St. Augustine invented this thing called the doctrine of original sin, which blamed Eve for sinning first. Eve sinned first. The serpent tempted her because she was the weaker sex. And she succumbed and ate the fruit and then went out and tempted Adam to fall with her. And so because of that act, God cursed the woman, had to be subservient to the man, had to submit to the man, had to have pain in childbirth. And really, a lot of them teach that a woman's calling is to suffer for life in all areas of life because that's part of this curse. So once you understand that that's where they're coming from, you're taught from the time you can remember as a young girl in white Christian nationalism that your body is pornography to men and boys. You know, your existence is a temptation to them. You are constantly tempting them to give in to their lustful urges and think about sex and think about, you know, things that they should not be doing. And so therefore, girls in these environments are taught that they must control themselves because boys and men can never control themselves. And there were all kinds of ways that was done to me. I had to go to chapel services and be taught how I walked, sit, stand, talk, dress, every aspect of my existence. I was told how I had to arrange that so that I wouldn't be a constant temptation to men and boys. Mm-hmm. Boys are taught that they can't help it when they have these thoughts. It's just part of being a man. It's part of what happens in their brains because of the way God made them. And so they can't help it when these girls and women tempt them to have these thoughts. And of course they should rebuke them. Of course they should feel bad about it. Of course they should work against that. But, they just really can't help it when they act on them. And so you see that play out in the way we punish men and boys for sexually assaulting, raping, and abusing women and girls and young boys. We see how they're not punished. 98% of sexual assaulters and abusers, according to RAINN, are never charged. They're never accused. Nothing happens to them in the United States. So that's part of what fuels this dynamic, that men are never responsible for their actions. And it's how I was taught as a child. And in that world of Christian nationalism, it's always the woman's fault when a man does this. Always.
And so even for young girls who are not legally able to consent, is it still their fault?
Yes. Yes, it is always the woman or girl's fault, because you're taught as a child. If you're 5 or 6 years old, I had to start wearing dresses every day starting in 4th grade because that's about when girls start getting their periods and your body starts changing. So at that point, I had to start wearing dresses to mask the shape of my body. So that was very typical. But if I wore something that was inappropriate, at one point I wanted a pair of Levi's because they were cool in the 70s, and I wanted those corduroy Levi's to wear. And a number of people in my church commented about how I shouldn't be a 2nd grader wearing boys' pants and showing off my body that way. So, it starts really early. And I know examples of young, tiny girls who have been told by their mothers in these environments, if you weren't such a slut, if you weren't dressed like that, then he wouldn't have touched you that way. 5 or 6 years old, having these things be said to them and having it be their fault as a child that some 30-year-old man couldn't control himself.
And even if you didn't grow up in this kind of white Christian nationalist environment, we see so many of these values in our mainstream society. Most public schools have dress codes, and the dress codes are almost all for women. Maybe boys can't wear hats. That's about it. But girls, you can't show off your shoulders. You can't wear spaghetti straps. You can't wear mini skirts. Sometimes they do like a test on how short the skirt is, which is just incredibly humiliating for girls. And we see this with if women are sexually assaulted, the first question is, what did you do to deserve it? And, that can be said in many different ways, but it is almost always said. And if you are a woman who goes through childbirth, there's a lot of pressure not to get the epidural because you're supposed to suffer and you might hurt the baby. And so we see how insidious these ideas are. And this began long before the Trump administration, but it feels to me like it's really supercharged, and that this extreme misogyny and this idea of women as not being full and complete people is a real explicit part of what their vision is for America.
Yes, it's part of saving America by saving the family, which is the Heritage Foundation's Project 2026. They want to transform the next 250 years of the United States by transforming the family. And it is a very rigid document that defines the man as the breadwinner, the leader of the home, the head of the household, and the woman as subservient to him in the home, breeding, having as many children as possible without the benefit of contraception. She should not work outside of the home. She should just have as many babies as God gives her and stay in the home and submit to her husband. So that is the vision that the Heritage Foundation put together that is being projected by this government. And you hear it everywhere today. Dr. Oz using the term underbabied comes from this document.
Yeah.
So the Sam and I on our last show talked about misandry and how this is a reaction to feminism, how recently United States women have had rights. And I went through and did a whole newsletter on how recently we gained some of our rights. We didn't have the right to have credit and banking in our own names officially until 1974 in the United States as women. You know, we couldn't vote until 1920 with the 19th Amendment, but Black women, women of color, really couldn't vote until 1965.
With the
and
Voting
now,
Rights Act. Yeah.
Yeah. And now that has been gutted. So a lot of this is a reaction to us getting our own autonomy. I was shocked that no-fault divorce was not the law in New York State until 2010.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't have a no-fault divorce law in the United States anywhere until 1969, the year I was born in California. They passed the first one. So some of our rights as women are incredibly recent.
Right. Right. And we've heard J.D. Vance has talked about how no-fault divorce is an evil, and he's held up his grandparents as a model, even though they had a violent marriage. I mean, clearly they're coming for no-fault divorce. They've already come for abortion. They're coming for contraception. Andra, how long do you think it is until being against the 19th Amendment will become a major part of the Republican Party platform?
It already is in places like Texas. It already is. When you see these dude bro men with the beards sitting around talking about how great it would be if women just weren't in public, and how we need to repeal the 19th Amendment and have household voting. That is part of this messaging from Saving America by Saving the Family. It is a way to normalize thinking about women not voting. And it is a backlash against the rights that we have earned. We haven't earned them. We fought for them. Women have fought for these rights for decades. And sometimes, I mean, the right to vote, that fight went on for 70 years.
Right.
So, you know, and Black women fought even longer than that for the right to vote. So, you know, we fought for these rights, and they don't want us to have them anymore. And that is the DARVO, the deny, attack, reverse victim, and defender psychological operation that they're doing with feminism by using a term like misandry, which is women who hate men. It convinces these young men that every problem they have is caused by women.
Right.
Because women hate them. And if you go into these forums and look at what these people are saying, it's everywhere right now.
It is.
And so these are all part of the same goal to get rid of the advances that women have made, put women back in the home, force women to have babies, lily white babies preferably, because the billionaire tech bros want more white people. And try to reverse the trend of white people declining as a population group.
And so you've got this messaging for men about how this is some way that they can take back their power as long as they're able to keep women down. But the messaging to women is quite different. I see that there are just tons of campaigns, whether it's, you know, Peter Thiel, who has, you know, launched an app to track your period and to try and get women off hormonal birth control. And, you know, or, you know, a lifestyle magazine that's trying to sell women on staying home and being Tradwives. And, there's, this whole aesthetic out there about like your life would be so much better if you were just churning butter all day and you had 8 babies and a husband who adores you. And, you're in these great milkmaid dresses and everything is so stylized, in these perfect Instagram settings. And so they're clearly trying to sell this to women as this is some sort of weird empowerment out there. And I'm wondering what you make of all this, and is it working at all?
I definitely believe it's working because these people are well funded, and the people that they choose to be the major influences are very savvy and good at what they do. So somebody like Allie Beth Stuckey, 30s, blonde, white, approachable, she's one of the perfect poster people for this movement. And she's really good at taking down people who disagree with her in a sarcastic way. So they've been very good at onboarding people who can push out these ideas. Turning Point USA. I mean, one of Charlie Kirk and now his wife, Erica Kirk's primary targets on college campuses has been young women. And why would you want to do anything other than get your MRS degree?
Right.
That's why you're at college. That's what you need to be doing at college.
Mm-hmm.
So, they have targeted this message in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. Now they have Turning Point High School chapters as well. And in the state of Florida, for example, they're very common. So they're even taking these teachings younger and younger to try to just keep women from looking to do anything but marry as young as possible and start having babies immediately. Yeah. So it's all a coordinated effort. I try to discourage any young women in my life from paying attention to Tradwife content. It's just propagandist brainwashing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know if you've read the novel Yesteryear. I still have to read it. But I'm looking forward to reading it because I really do believe it takes down that whole industry in an effective way.
And the ultimate irony to me about the Tradwife movement is that you do have these influencers. These are women in the public sphere. These are women who are making lots of money off of this and are no doubt the breadwinners of their families. Their husbands are props next to them in cowboy hats, but they're not the ones who are bringing in the money. And that to me is just such a fundamental disconnect between the messaging. But, it does not seem like this is deterring anyone, this inherent contradiction here.
It's not really a contradiction if you understand what's behind it. In the late 80s, they had people like Phyllis Schlafly and Anita Bryant before this, but in the late 80s, early 90s,
was an attorney, who is, pretending to be a housewife. Right.
But they understood late 80s, early 90s that they needed a lot more women to sell this to women. That having men standing up constantly and telling women to know their place and stay in it wasn't going to be as effective as having women do that.
And that goes back to the original suffragist movement. Right. I mean, the most effective messengers were women who were saying, no, we don't need to vote. That would sully us.
Right. So they've always deployed women against women. And there are certain women, especially if you've been entrenched in these high control environments like white Christian nationalism, where you have no agency, you have no ability to do anything other than be a mom and be in the home. And suddenly you're given this platform, you're given this power over other people. And it's really compelling for a lot of women in those communities, and they build power that way, and they build themselves up that way, and they feel good about themselves that way. It's another thing that I think was really bad and insidious about social media at the beginning, because I was able to reconnect with a bunch of these people that I grew up with, and my life was very different from theirs. A lot of them had stayed in the school and church and hometown that I grew up in, and I had left. I traveled. I've had several careers. I never had children, and so my life looks very different from theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening in the minds of these women, and this is the fuel that these influencers use,
Mm-hmm.
is I haven't been able to do any of those things. I haven't been able to have a life like that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to make those choices. So by God, neither will you.
Yeah.
I will take that away from you.
Yeah.
And that envy, that resentment
Mm-hmm.
is what drives these women. It drives them to seek that power and suppress other women. It drives the women at the next level to do it to each other.
Mm.
And so that's one reason why this Tradwife movement is so effective, I think, because they've tapped into how to sell this to women and girls using your underlying envies and resentments and insecurities.
And also, it's a solution to a totally different problem, which is, they're saying, don't you hate your job? You're not paid enough. This is drudgery. Wouldn't you like to just go and bake bread all day, instead of saying, maybe you're underpaid because women still don't make as much money as men for the same labor that they create. And maybe we're all being exploited under this system and everything is unaffordable. And that's the problem we should be solving, instead of saying everybody needs to go and be a homesteader, for instance.
Right. And I can't imagine anything more boring and horrible than baking bread all day.
I mean, that's the thing with domestic labor, it is drudgery. I hate it. Like I was raised, my mother stayed at home for most of my life, and she was much better at keeping things clean than I ever, would be, because, in part because I suppose I'm lazy in that respect, but also that was my little rebellion, because like I wanted to read and I wanted to use my mind and go to college. And, that was not my end goal, was to dust. My mother was a very smart woman. She almost has a PhD. She could do far more than vacuum all day, but that was the role that, my dad wanted for her. It was, he's traditional and Greek Orthodox, and that was their decision, but that wasn't what I wanted. But, there's so much that we all just have to do in our lives that just sucks, just to live, whether it's dusting or doing the dishes. And I can't help but notice that all of those tech bros that have created all these AI systems to try and replace the arts and writers, where is my robot to do my vacuuming?
I want one to clean my toilet.
I clean my toilet, do my dishes. I want robots for that. I want them to do that so I have more time to write. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they're not creating robots to do that sort of thing.
No, it's absolutely not. This is, everything they're targeting are the things that we can use to push back against them. So human generated ideas and creativity are certainly something that they're trying to do away with AI. And especially women's creativity, and
which they've said
agency.
Explicitly. I mean, Alex from Palantir, the CEO, said, we are going to take away the jobs of women, and this is going to create, a problem for Democrats politically, and that is a goal.
Mm-hmm. And so for younger people, or for people who have younger women in their lives who may be watching this, please understand how much they are targeted and bombarded with this kind of Tradwife content, with these ideas of what they should be doing as young women, as much as young men are being targeted with, wouldn't it be great if you could just make that girl over there go sit in her house and serve you all day? Wouldn't it be great if you could put her in her place and never let her get out? We have to understand how both of these populations are being served these ideas that are really vile, and odious. and reach out to these younger people in our lives, even if it's just to say, what have you been watching and doing lately and reading? And, you know, just listen to them and see what comes up, because you are going to have a bigger influence with them than perhaps anyone can.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know on the, you know, new media side for young men, there's the looks maxing trend. And, you know, there are so many influencers out there that are explicitly advocating rape and just extremely damaging ideologies. And, you know, they kind of hook young men in by talking about video games and sports and, you know, getting to some of the ways that people feel alienated. Because, of course, when you're a young person, you're grappling with who you are. And especially being born in a world where you had to deal with a pandemic and an insurrection and Trump dominating everything for over 10 years, there's a lot of anxiety out there. But the answers that they're providing are really disturbing. And I think a lot of parents aren't really aware how much young people are being targeted by these messages.
I don't think they are. And I think it's really important to know what the young people in your lives are looking at, not in a nosy, snoopy, you know, boundaryless way, but in an ongoing conversational kind of way of not just letting them shut down and shut you out, but asking them to have a conversation with you about that. Yeah. I saw the most excellent thing online this week, that a mother had a teenage son and he wanted a car. And I don't even know how many Americans can afford to buy a car for their teenagers anymore. But she told him, you have to read these 100 books on feminism. And if you do that and you have to report on them, you're not just going to be able to say, I read them. We're going to talk about them. Mm-hmm. And once you've done all that, I'll buy you a car. So that could be a way to motivate some of these young men, if you still have control over something they want, to get them to read more things and study more things with feminist ideas and ideologies, so that you can talk about them with them and help them understand really that women being empowered empowers men.
Right.
And taking away women's power disempowers men.
Yeah, because I mean, the flip side of it is if you want your wife at home, then that means that you're the sole breadwinner, and that is a lot on your plate, and you know, a lot for you to live up to, instead of, you know, marriage as a partnership where you're in it together, and you don't have that kind of same supportive relationship. So, I mean, there are a lot of benefits to having, you know, a more egalitarian society. And I think so many people think that, you know, if somebody else gains rights, that means I'm losing them. But it's not a finite, you know, pie that just gets divvied up. And, you know, certainly if you look at this country where now women have fewer rights than they did just a few years ago with the Dobbs decision, the Voting Rights Act is all but gone thanks to the Supreme Court's Calais decision and others that it built upon. We all have fewer rights than we did, you know, just 5 years ago. And I think that's going to change things in ways that a lot of people haven't really expected, because I think there are a lot of people who really felt, I think deep in their bones, like the words of former President Obama, that, you know, I'll just paraphrase, but we're always marching towards progress. Things would always get better. And now we see that they're not, because there is a really clear, explicit agenda from these white nationalist forces to turn back the clock, and not just a few years, but centuries. Yeah. And, you know, that's not something that the majority wants, but the majority of us have to want to fight it as much as they want to impose it on us.
And that is a daily job. That is a job for people here, whether you live in a blue state or a red state or in some other country, because they want this everywhere, not just in the United States. So securing those rights, standing up for those rights, isn't a situation where you can say, well, that'll never happen to me because it's protected in our state constitution. Right. Or, we have that right here, so I'm not going to worry about what those stupid red state women want. That's not how we have to be. We each have to say every day, what can I do when I get up in the morning to make sure that I have the same freedoms at the end of the day that I had at the beginning of the day? We all have to be doing that. And men, especially white men, have to stand up for women a lot more than they are, in my view.
I know that you have written about this online rape academy that was uncovered, and that was one of the more chilling things that I have read in the last few months. Can you talk with us about that and how this really does fit in with the white Christian nationalist agenda?
The Online Rape Academy was a website that was based in the Netherlands, but they put different pieces of it all over so that you can't shut it down easily. That site has since been shut down by the Dutch government, but it'll probably crop up somewhere else. So it was a site called motherless.com. No coincidence that it was named motherless.com. And they hosted all kinds of sexual assault and abuse content. And one piece of it, there were a number of different tags where you could go in and watch a guy drug, eye check to make sure she was unconscious, and then rape his wife or girlfriend. There was a Telegram group of about 1,000 people worldwide who were sending each other drugs and sharing tips for this. But a content person, a web person, dug into the numbers behind that site and found that over the course of 1 year, 43 million unique web addresses in the United States visited those tags for sleep or ZZZ or unconscious. Baby sleeping was one of them. I just can't with these people. And so, 43 million unique visitors who did not bounce off the page and say, oh, this wasn't what I wanted. Yeah. They stayed, is a lot. And even if we say, well, women like porn too, and maybe 20% of those were women, that's still millions of men that went to look at this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that millions of American men are drugging and raping their wives and girlfriends while they're unconscious. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that if 43 million men want to look at that stuff and they get off on it, mm-hmm. then they could at some point have the potential to commit some kind of sexual assault. Maybe not that kind, but some kind. And so it was really sobering for me. Several of the women that were interviewed, one of them had been married for 20 years to her husband, and he was doing this to her. What a betrayal.
Yeah.
That, as a woman in the United States, you spend every second of your day when you're out of your house going, how can I not be raped and sexually assaulted today? Right. But now you also have to think about it in your house.
Right.
So it was a really upsetting thing. And then the reaction online was basically, not all men. You hate men. This is misandry. This is all terrible. You women are horrible. You're exaggerating. All of that. Instead of more men saying, you know what? Men are really terrible. And I know at least one man who probably went to this website. And I know who they are because I tell my wife and daughters to avoid those men. Those are the men. I don't confront them, but I say, you just probably don't ever want to be around them. They're creeps. It's those men that we need to be more forcefully standing up to and confronting. The men do. Yeah. The women don't. The men do.
Yeah. Well, I know that you write about such hard topics, but they're so important. But one thing that you do for your readers every week on Substack is you ask them, what gave you hope this week? And I'm wondering, is are some weeks harder than others to do that? And what kind of responses do you usually get from your readers?
Sure, some weeks are harder, but I found as I've made myself do it every week, it gets easier to find something. It can just be, I got up this morning and I'm not dead. That's hopeful. We can always find ways to be hopeful. I'm sorry if you can hear they're working on our elevator. And so there may be a little noise in my.
I just heard something for the first time. Yeah.
Okay. It has not been working. Anyway, so that is one thing that I do to try to be hopeful is to do that practice every week to say what gave me hope. And I can always find something that's not toxic hope, that's not silly, super optimistic hope, but this really did give me hope. A lot of my readers have glommed on to that. And sometimes it's this particular thing happened in politics. I try to keep mine away from that. And try to find things outside of that sphere that give me hope. But a lot of my readers, it is, we won this election, or we accomplished this thing, or my indivisible group had this meeting and there were hundreds of people there, or things like that give people hope. It is important. I have said often on my Substack, and I'm going to use a bad word, hope is a fuck you to fascism, because it is. They don't want us to be hopeful.
Right.
And so when you walk around saying there's nothing we can do, everything is hopeless, what's the point of having the midterms because, everything's terrible, that's exactly how they want you to feel.
Right.
And so connecting with hope, something hopeful that is truly hopeful, not just flummery that you're doing to yourself, is really important, an important practice to do every day, especially during this season in our country.
I agree with that. And that's incredibly inspiring. And I completely admire that you're able to do that, because you write about the topics that are just so difficult for us to grapple with. And so if you can hang on to hope, I think we all can. Andra, what is the best way that people can find your work?
I have a Substack called For Such a Time as This. I would love for people to subscribe. And you can find me on Lincoln Square every week at Unholy Ground on Sundays. It's a lot of people for church. They call it church for them on Sundays. They go to that instead of church. So with Sam Osterhout. So you can find me there. I'm on Blue Sky at my name, Andra Watkins. And you can find me on Lincoln Square's YouTube channel also. I'm sure this will be up there as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time for us today.
Thank you, Susan, for having me. It was great to catch up with you.
It's always great to talk with you. And thank you for joining us as well at home.